Hi, and welcome to Eds Division. I'm Glenn Reynolds, and you're tuned in to the #1 libertarian talk television show on the internet. And, well, that's really something, isn't it? I'm joined today by Michelle Caruso-Cabrera. She's a CNBC anchor with Power Lunch, and she has a new book out called You Know I'm Right, More Prosperity, Less Government. And that's certainly singing our song. So good to have you here, Michelle. It's just great. We've got you by Skype from the CNBC studios.
Glenn, I am so thrilled to be here. I think this whole setup is fantastic. I love how you are creating content over the internet. Love it. Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, we like to brag about our globe-girdling PJTV network, which actually is just the internet, but that's kind of the cool thing in a way, too. Well, thanks for taking time to join us. Now, you say that you're sort of, you want a political party that keeps its hands out of your pocketbook and out of your bedroom. I guess now with the TSA, we can say out of your pants, too. I don't know. But you say you felt sort of partyless, even though you describe yourself as a sort of Republican. Tell us what you mean by that.
Well, I felt like for years the Republicans were very focused on social issues, and they had taken their eye off the ball when it came to fiscal issues. And I really want a government that stays out of my pocketbook and out of my private life. So I always felt like I had a choice between a party that I understood fiscally, didn't like so much socially, or the Democrats who I was more comfortable with on the social issues, but fiscally I didn't make any sense to me. So I was left with having to make a choice. I think a lot of Americans actually feel like they have to make that choice. And I guess I ended up leaning more towards the conservative side, but there are other people who make the choice to go toward the more liberal side, depending on which of those sets of values they really want to pursue the most.
Yeah, it's really quite interesting that we seem to be sort of going through a libertarian moment now. I mean, as you may know, a lot of Tea Party leaders have actually written the GOP folks in the House and told them they want to focus on fiscal issues and not on social issues. So do you think that maybe that's going to change and that you're not going to have to make quite the same choice over the next 10 years that you had to make over the last, I don't know, 20, 30, whatever?
I certainly hope so. I feel like we might be at that moment where I finally see the discussion happening about what do you do if you're a fiscal conservative but a social liberal. I've seen it all over MSNBC for the last couple of days, for example. So there's a real kind of reckoning going on about why is it that we define our parties in this way when it really doesn't make any sense. And then when you say given the choice over the last 20 or 30 years, I think the Tea Party stems from the fact that a lot of folks thought, okay, I'm going to vote conservative because I want a fiscally conservative government, and I'll kind of look the other way on the social issues. And then what they saw for 8 years under the direction of George Bush was actually an abandonment of all those fiscal issues in the first place and almost an exclusive focusing on social issues instead.
Yeah, and you've been pretty outspoken about that. As a matter of fact, we've got a little clip of you here from the Rachel Maddow show where you go kind of into some detail about that. Can we roll that clip?
What everybody found kind of amusing or disheartening through all of this is that the House Republicans were so upset about the spending, the size of the bill, et cetera, et cetera. Now they're upset about spending? I mean, I lean very far to the right, and for 8 years I watched them pass every single bill. They spent money left like drunken sailors. And now they want to get tough on spending?
I was almost left speechless there, Glenn, because I was so frustrated by the whole thing. George Bush, in his first 4 years in office, never vetoed a single bill. You'd have to go back to John Adams to see a president who didn't veto anything his first term in office. Consider that Ronald Reagan used the veto 22 times, and he fought everything on the budget. But George Bush did not, and I wish he had.
And yet now, you know, George Bush looks good by comparison because Barack Obama has come in and made drunken sailors look cautious and responsible and fiscally prudent. I mean, and that I think has been kind of a wake-up call for the public. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. They've seen all of this spending. And what I find frustrating about the particular moment is right now a lot of people are asking, well, will President Obama now shift to being more centrist? First, he has to rewrite his view of history because we keep hearing from him that what got us into this trouble were the policies under the Bush administration where there was too little regulation, too little government. And that's not true. We had more regulation, more government, more spending under George W. Bush. To me, this election message was a repudiation of Barack Obama and also a second repudiation of George W. Bush. To people like you and me, maybe I shouldn't speak for you, but to people like me, what I saw over the last 2 years was a continuation of the previous 8 years. We've had 10 years of big government spending, and that's what the Tea Party was about. They're done. Enough already. We've had it.
Well, I call it the Nigel Tufnell administration because actually, you know, he took what the Bush administration did and they turned it up to 11, you know, so... and I do think that kind of got people's attention. We'd had a long, slow growth of government that people sort of, you know, they noticed it, they didn't like it, but it's like the old story about the frog in the pot of water. But then somebody turned the stove all the way up and the frog started to kick, and that's really what we've got now. Now, one of the things you say in your book that I think is really, really worth repeating, which is why I'm going to repeat it right now, is you say fiscal responsibility is social responsibility. And I think that's a point that deserves to be expanded on some. So tell us a little about what you mean by that.
I wrote that chapter out of frustration. When I was telling people that I was writing this book, one of my friends who's more liberal said, "What are you going to call it? Every man, woman, and child for himself?" The problem with you people, I always hear, is you don't care about the poor. You don't care about the needy. And that really offends me and it upsets me. Because I firmly believe that fiscal responsibility is socially responsible. If a government runs itself into the poorhouse, it can't take care of anyone. I've covered Latin America for 20 years, and I watched what happened in Argentina when they overspent, and poverty rates hit 50% in just a couple of months. They had had a very large middle class, and it was heartbreaking to see formerly middle-class people looking through the garbage. What is socially responsible about that? That came through fiscal irresponsibility. That's what we see in Europe as well. For so long, the Europeans have looked down their noses at Americans and said, "Oh, we take care of our people, womb to tomb, Social Security, they have no worries." Well, guess what? All of that costs money, and now the money's run out. And it is not socially responsible to now say to somebody who thought that they could retire tomorrow, they can't retire tomorrow. Oh, the health care benefits you thought you were going to have, you're not going to have. That is not socially responsible. If they had been fiscally responsible from the beginning, they wouldn't have those issues. That's the way we need to think about things here in the United States.
Well, you know, that's absolutely right. You know, I always feel like socialists must love poor people because they tend to produce a lot of them when they're in power. You sort of paraphrase Ronald Reagan in your book where you point out that every dollar that the government spends is in fact a dollar that it's taken from somebody. And yet somehow by doing that it's supposed to be compassionate. And I thought an interesting point was when you talked about Medicare and Social Security, and you say you have a choice. Do you care about old people today, or do you care about old people in the future? And why don't you expand on that a little?
Well, I think if you ever went to somebody and said, would you go to your grandchildren and ask them for 30% of their income? Because that's what you're doing, basically, if we continue on the path that we're going down. Would you tell your ancestors to hand over almost all of their income to support your benefits? I don't think the average person would. But when they don't have to actually see the person that they're taking it from, it's easier to do that. But that's what people are doing at the moment. So we really have to, when you look at the federal budget, the big problem is Medicare. It is eating up the federal budget, and we have to grapple with healthcare costs and why healthcare costs are rising so dramatically and faster than the rate of inflation.
You know, I think that's really right. And actually, here at PJTV, we've got an online deficit calculator as part of the National Economic Rescue Initiative, we call it, with the PJ Institute. But it lets you go through the federal budget and adjust spending in a whole bunch of different categories and then look at how it affects the deficit and the debt on out to the end of the century. And the thing that actually struck me about that is how much you have to cut to bring things under control. You know, you tend to think, oh, if you sort of nip and tuck 5% here, 10% there. I started off with an across-the-board cut, and I had to cut over 25% of everything, Social Security, Medicare, defense, the whole thing, to line things up. I mean, it's a much deeper hole that we're in than I think most people really get in their gut.
Yeah, first of all, you have to get rid of entire departments. which are easy to do because they're actually pretty new and they're not the role of government anyways, right? The Department of Energy, the Department of Labor, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Education. Department of Energy was created to end our reliance on foreign oil. That has not served us in any way, shape, or form. Guess what? We're still reliant on foreign oil, and it's a pretty new creation. It was created under Jimmy Carter. That could easily go away. You get rid of a lot of departments. That's fine. That takes away a lot of a big chunk of the money, but in the end, it still comes back to entitlement spending. We call it entitlements. I hate that word, but you really have to grapple with Medicare, and the way it's set up is really incentivizing people to use more and more, and not to be really good shareholders or good users of the product.
I think that's absolutely right. I think we're going to have to do that. I think the good news is that, you know, we've had the wake-up call, and I just hope that people focus sooner rather than later. Let me ask you this. You've got a book out called You Know I'm Right. You're an anchor at CNBC. If I didn't know anything, I would have expected CNBC to sort of lean to the right because it's business-oriented, but because I actually watch CNBC, I know that that's not really so much the case. What's it like? So I hesitate to call it coming out of the closet, but taking this sort of high-profile role at CNBC, how is that playing out for you?
It's cable, and cable has gone through, I think we're in a golden age of cable where people are encouraged to express from where their underlying beliefs come and why that frames their questions and how that frames their questions. We generally are going to be a little bit more conservative. I don't mean conservative, but more, we would speak in defense of shareholder values, in defense of private property, because those are the things that make the market run. And of course, we're going to be more supportive of free market initiatives, or at least more understanding of how when government tries to do something, oftentimes what happens is not what they intended at all, but a whole bunch of unintended consequences. So that's a phrase that you hear a lot more on CNBC than I think you hear on any other network. I feel great. I say what I want when I want, and as long as we keep it on business issues, it's fine. The only thing is we get a little bit of brand confusion sometimes because MSNBC is obviously very liberal. And so people, I think since we're part of the NBC family, then we must be that way as well. And we're not actually. We're actually more agnostic and just more interested in business.
So final question. Out there in Internet TV land, there are a lot of people watching who might want to follow in your footsteps. What advice would you give to people if they want to get started in a media career as somebody who sort of leans libertarian or right?
Become a journalist right now. Start writing. It's so easy to write and get published now compared to the way it used to be. My first job, I really wanted to go into print, and I begged and pleaded. I wanted a job in print so bad. I graduated in the middle of the recession, so I could not. I ended up going into TV, which has actually served me well. So that was a twist of fate that I'm actually happy about. But blog and write. And if you're in high school, go work for your high school paper. If you don't have a high school paper, start one. If you're in college, go work for your college paper. And if you don't have one, start one. Start writing on the internet. Start creating content. With video cameras have gotten so much cheaper. You can post to YouTube and start telling your story. And you'll learn to become a better storyteller over time. And you'll know what people like and don't like because you have the automatic response of the number of clicks. And read a lot. Read everything. I get up at 5 in the morning and start reading newspaper after newspaper after newspaper. You just want to be a sponge of information.
Well, thanks so much. That's just do it is the advice I always give people to it. I think it's good advice and not just for shoe companies. Thanks, Michelle. It's been great having you here.
Oh, it's been great being on with you, and congratulations to you and all your success with Instapundit. I look at it every day, and PJTV. It's fabulous.
Well, thank you so much. That's Michelle Caruso-Cabrera. She's the author of You Know I'm Right and CNBC anchor at Power Lunch. Check out her book on Amazon or in fine bookstores everywhere. And we'll be back here on InstaVision next week. So in the meantime, have fun on the internet. Thanks.